Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating with Zimperium, and welcome to another webinar as we continue to roll through the questions and thoughts that a lot of customers have been asking us to hit. And today we've got a great one, and we've got a great presenter as well, and that is John Michelson. John is our CTO. One of the main questions a lot of customers will ask us is, okay, how do we know threats are real? I don't see them. And we're going to dive into perhaps why you don't see them if you don't, which is a pretty simple explanation that John will get into. In classic webinar fashion, we're going to shoot for about 30 minutes or so with Q&A at the end. I will be keeping an eye on both the chat. If you have any kind of technical difficulties or anything, feel free to drop that in the chat. And then please use the Q&A section to fire up questions that John and I will facilitate at the end. So without any further ado, John, the table is yours.
Thank you, JT. And I appreciate anyone who's willing to spend these about 30 minutes with me, because this is a therapy session for me. I end up with this question all the time. We're in this very strange world where 100% of our customers see attacks. And yet every enterprise we talk to that is not yet a customer pretty much says, we don't see attacks. Now, how is this possible? And I'll cut to the chase and I'll explain, and then I'll back it up for the rest of our 30 minutes together. You do not see attacks on mobile because you cannot see attacks on mobile. You have no visibility to mobile. I hear this all the time, though. I hear perfectly rational people say, John, I get it that maybe it's possible for there to be problems in mobile devices with hacking. And I do know that maybe there's some ransomware, this or that, or maybe someone got their password stolen in a consumer kind of fraud thing. But we aren't seeing any attacks on mobile, so we aren't really interested at this point in prioritizing it over other things that we're looking at. But then I have to be the guy, the bringer of bad news, and say, okay, now I've just, presume for a moment, I've just done a demonstration of a few types of attacks on a mobile device. And we do this very often when we engage with a customer. We show them the way that devices can be attacked. Okay, we've just done these demonstrations, and if these were your own corporate-owned managed devices with your MDM, would you have known this had occurred? Would there be some screen going off or some text being sent to a security officer or anything going on at all? The answer is no. So you don't see attacks because you have no ability to see attacks. So the question immediately becomes, is this actually happening? And I like to put things in context, and because I know that you guys as potential customers and trying to assess the risk and vulnerability of all these different computing platforms, I get it that you can't focus on everything and you can't worry about everything to the same extent. So when you look at Windows and you see the type of unbelievable exposure you could potentially have, right? I mean, just the last few CVEs, we grabbed some data on some 2017 CVEs. Still, right, evolution of privileges, which means that, people can remount file systems. They can look in the bottom. 21 million systems were compromised with a particular vulnerability. Banking Trojans. 14 million systems had malware that gave hackers admin access. Clearly, Windows is a platform that needs to be protected. With this kind of vulnerability, it makes perfect sense for you guys to make sure there's plenty of visibility to what's going on that platform. Well, the issue is these are all mobile. These are all mobile. In fact, I'll spend some more time on this later, but in fact, there are more zeros on these numbers at the bottom, these in the wild threats, than in the Windows world. If you remember, WannaCry was maybe or arguably the biggest outbreak last year that we had, and it was reportedly infecting about 400,000. Some reports said 200,000, some said 400,000. 400,000 systems on the high side estimate were actually infected with WannaCry. But here's 21 million in just one malware strain called Dirty Cow. So when you think about the very reasons why you know that Windows needs protection, there's corporate data on it, that it has access to very sensitive systems, that it has vulnerabilities, and that hackers can take advantage of them. Every one of those realities is also true in mobile. But because you don't see what you cannot see, you don't have the ability to say, oh my gosh, we've got to do something about it. So the rest of our time here, as I said, is me trying to give you some of that visibility. So I mentioned that just like Windows has vulnerabilities that obviously needs to be protected from, we clearly have that also in mobile. And in fact, just do a comparison of Windows 10 versus the two major mobile platforms, Android and iOS. There is a vast number of additional CVEs recently reported on the mobile platforms, even relative to Windows. Not that that actually matters, by the way. This comparison of Android versus iOS, or Android versus Windows or whatever, it actually isn't particularly relevant. Hackers don't actually care if one is more than the other. Wherever the data is, they're going to attack, right? And if there are vulnerabilities at all, they're going to be able to take advantage of those. So it's not really about a comparison, but it is important to note that while we do a lot to make sure our Windows desktops are protected, and of course our servers, we have significant vulnerability in mobile platforms that also have corporate data and access on them. So we've got a significant issue here. And in fact, these platforms are still in the immaturing stage. We're adding significant functionality to iOS and Android every year. They're growing in terms of their capabilities, not stabilizing in terms of the capabilities. So we aren't going to expect to see this number of CVEs trend flat or down for quite some time, maybe ever, because the next generation of mobile will be an IoT wearable, and it'll disintegrate from a single device into many little devices, and those themselves will have their own immaturing stage of growth. So we've got to think about this problem not as even a temporary issue, but a permanent situation we're in. The next, okay, so again, you're my therapist, and here I am. I'm getting to kind of lay out all this. Here's what all these very smart people do to make me have to tell them things that they probably should already know. But here's the next one. Okay, they understand now that they don't see mobile attacks because they can't see them. They understand that the platforms themselves have vulnerabilities, and they can understand that. So then the obvious next question is, yeah, but it's not really happening, is it? Oh my goodness, it's really happening. I mean, we take a snapshot of any place in the world. We like New York. And by the way, we like New York for lots of ways. One of them is that New York City just became a customer for their own citizens of New York, but even are now rolling out to all of the citizens and frequent visitors of New York a solution to mobile cyber protection that is based on our technology, which is great, and we're really excited to be working with the city of New York, because those folks in New York saw this and realized they needed to do something about it. So hopefully we'll be showing you something like this, and you'll know you need to do something about it. This is, of course, a breakdown of just over a certain period of time, the threats that our devices have seen. This isn't every threat that's occurred, by the way. We wouldn't have that visibility ourselves. Where our devices have already been deployed and where we have seen attacks, here they are. And if you're looking closely at this screen, you're seeing some high numbers. There are some places where attackers have had, up until recently, have had fair, easy access to as many victims as they wish. 94 in one case, right there in the center of Midtown, right? I think that's where we are. Anyway. Oh no, that's in Brooklyn or off the main island. No matter. So attacks are happening, and there's a high level of frequency. In fact, we have, of course, a global threat intelligence repository. We've been collecting data on enterprise and consumers across regions, all the regions of the world, for years now. And we have a very precise point of view here. This isn't about guessing. In fact, this is from Q4 last year, the breakdown of what these devices are actually seeing. And yes, it varies by region, and yes, it varies consumer versus enterprise, but it's not a vast difference, by the way. It's not like one platform sees all the threats and the other one doesn't, or one region of the world sees all the threats and none of the other regions do. It's not like that. There is variation, but it's slight. So this aggregated view gives us a really good picture. If you look at the left, I'll read this really quickly. On the left-hand side, we measure the risk of the device. How easy is it to attack? And the green bar is there's a low risk of attack, which means it would take essentially a really purpose-driven activity by a hacker and potentially a 0 day in order to really compromise it. But every other one of those bars is represent devices that are fairly easy to attack. Known exploits, configured improperly from a security perspective, et cetera. In the middle, okay, what about in the global repository of devices that run our technology and have our detection on it, which ones do actually see threats? Well, you see this, it's what, 30%, right? Over the course of a quarter, 3 months, 30%. That surprises most of you, because when I get to see you guys face to face and I'm having this conversation and I show you this middle bar, you thought this number was 1%. You thought that the annual report that Verizon comes out with says 1% of devices have malware on them. They're all Android, and so you don't really need to worry about mobile. If you've actually done mobile research, you may have seen that, and it essentially says go back to sleep. That is not the reality of what we see. And here's a breakdown. And this is just actual data we pull right out of our global threat intelligence repository. Now, if we were to go, we can't in this period of time go through an exhaustive breakdown of all these threats. But if you're looking at the right-hand side of this slide, you see there are a significant number of types of threats. It turns out mobile's a very vulnerable platform, not because of Apple's fault or Google's fault, but honestly because the device itself has many ways to deliver content to it. And of course, that content can be friendly to you, or it can be malicious. You can attack its network, you can attack the device itself, or you can attack through app delivery, right? Where we actually ourselves download apps that actually are not friendly to us but harmful to us. All three of those, and there's breakdowns within each of those. So the problem is it's a very vulnerable platform. It's too easy to attack. And of course, it's happening. And here's the breakdown. So there's a point at which we've got to say this is no longer subject to opinion. This is actually data, right? And here, it's in the news every day, right? Again, it's muddled with all kinds of crazy politics here in the US, right? But it's here every single day. And if I were reading left to right, and I won't in the interest of time, you can do your own research here, or you can ask us for a cheat sheet of a bunch of recent news items. Everything from nation state stuff all the way down to consumers getting ransomware and Bitcoin mining on your mobile device, which is nuts, by the way, right? Bitcoin mining on a mobile device. It tells you just how powerful mobile devices are, I guess. But anyway, the point is we've got a lot of data points here to demonstrate that this is actually happening. Raw data, and it's even surfaced in the news. Now, again, I made a point a minute ago, and I'm just going to just spend 30 more seconds on it. I end up in a lot of, and again, this is, as I warned you, this is sort of a therapy session for me. I do often get this perception from people who are mostly iOS shops. Well, you know what? iOS is safer than Android, so I think we're fine. A hacker has never said that. A hacker has never said, well, it's my job. I'm literally responding to an RFP to do an advanced persistent threat on company XYZ. But you know what? iOS is a little safer than Android, so I think I'm not going to get to hack it. I think I'll have to give up on that project. That's not what they say, is it? It has nothing to do with whether the hacker decides. The hacker goes where the value is. The hacker goes where the activity is, where the data is. And by the way, that iOS device with no detection technology on it, as I've already shown you in other slides, has plenty of opportunity for the hacker. In fact, again, I can't exhaustively cover this slide, but hopefully you guys after you'll see the video, and if you want to go back and look at this over or follow up with a question, feel free. The only place where you can actually grant iOS additional credit over Android, because both platforms are doing the best they can, is malicious apps don't tend to be in the public app store in iOS. And there's some specific reasons for that we could get into. But the malicious apps in the public app store is generally not a problem. It happens, by the way, a little bit of trivia. What was the largest deployed piece of malware ever? It was an iOS app. It was an iOS app. It was. So when you think about it, in general, it's actually not a problem. Although, again, in caveat, it does happen from time to time. Android has more of an issue there. In every other way, there isn't a discrimination between iOS and Android. And the relativeness of iOS versus Android itself is a meaningless conversation because that's not how your adversary is thinking. So if that's how you're thinking, you're making yourself more vulnerable, right? All right, so it's happening to a lot of folks, big numbers and all that stuff. But what about to like a company like mine? Like, here I am at a legit enterprise, and we're sort of careful, and we have an MDM or whatever it is. Does it actually happen to companies like mine? Unfortunately, the answer to that is yes. Okay, here's a major bank. A hacker set up a rogue access point and snared a bunch of mobile devices so that they could start stealing credentials, doing reconnaissance scanning, and then start targeting phishing campaigns. There you go. Now, the second half of this slide is about what our capability does to protect you from that. And of course, we love that. And we're educating you in order for you to become a customer, clearly, right? But our point right now, we don't have to worry on the protection side. I want you to worry about, does this happen to companies like yours? And here's a bank, rogue access points, phones connect to it. They were in trouble. Of course, with our solution, they were not in trouble. But if you don't have our solution, you are. Second example, a malicious profile. iOS has this lovely capability called iOS profiles. What it allows people to do is essentially customize configuration, open up network settings, change proxies and VPNs and stuff like that. Well, this can be exploited. In this particular case, a consultant who worked for the company who uses our technology wanted to access a free gaming site. The free gaming site said, hey, we need you to install this configuration tool. It's actually an iOS profile. They called it a configuration tool, an installation and configuration tool. Very, very clever, right? The user, relatively intelligent guy, knows that he should keep his his device with good hygiene and all that stuff. Thinks, sure, I'll install this installer and configuration tool. It turns out it actually, most of the apps in the App Store essentially opened up a third-party app store. Yes, you can get to third-party apps without jailbreaking the device. And in this case, he did that. And then he downloaded an app that turned out that compromised his device, exposed his entire device, corporate and personal, to whatever the hacker wishes. Completely compromised the device. Third example, free VPNs. We love these. So the company says you can't get to Gmail while you're on our network, and we want to get to Gmail. So our users install free VPN services. Well, the problem, and we're learning this through all of the hearings on Facebook and all of the reality of just how these so-called, think about it, the $1 billion investment that Facebook makes every year in R&D on a product that's free. Well, we are the product, right? Our data is the product at Facebook. And frankly, it's the product to the free VPNs. So we have, and we see this all the time, users with full management of their device and all this nonsense going on, right? And we think we're fine, are installing free VPN services that the business model is provide all the bandwidth to your users for free and sell data about your users out the back door. And these VPNs are located anywhere in the world. That data could be residing in places that are hostile to your country or to your organization. And it's absolutely happening quite a bit. Final one of my examples. Apps can go rogue, and when they do, they expose the entire device. Here was an interesting, this is actually an interesting kind of bank, not a literal bank, what we say global bank, it's sort of a global banking organization. These guys, this particular employee was on assignment in Africa, wound up downloading a malicious app. They are using Android for Work, or now called Android Enterprise. So the whole idea is protect the enterprise by controlling everything that you can do there, and then allow the user the personal side of the device, and they can do whatever they want. The problem is a malicious app on the personal side still has access to all the enterprise data. The fact that you set up this construct for the user and for the enterprise not to be able to see it doesn't mean the hacker who compromises the device does not get to see it. The hacker gets to see everything. It's still one platform. So the malicious app's installed on the personal side, the entire device is exposed. And again, we can protect from that, but that's not specifically our point right now. Our point here is even with really solid MDM or EMM, even with containerization, in this case, Android for Work or Android Enterprise, you still have great vulnerability because those are all management solutions. They're essentially identity and access management, provisioning, inventory. They're all useful features, and we partner with all of the guys I'm talking about, by the way. We love them. They're important. But they're not focused on a hacker's ability to do damage to the device. They're actually focused on your ability to do damage to the device as a kind of a whoops employee, right? An employee making a mistake and doing something silly on his device does expose data in the wild. And that needs management features in order to protect you. But that doesn't stop, those management features don't stop a hacker from doing that same damage. So we've got lots of data on it's happening. We have vulnerable platforms, and it's nobody's fault. They're just vulnerable. Every platform's been vulnerable. It's happening to companies like yours. So the threat is real. This is not opinion, but fact. And it's interesting because in so many endeavors in security, we have fact-based conversations, but we have total opinion conversations when it comes to mobile. I've heard so many security experts say, listen, if they want to get in, they'll get in. And then I say, well, what about your mobile device? And say, oh, they can't get in. It's like, what? How did that happen? Wait, didn't you just spend your entire career saying if they want in, they'll get in? So what are we going to do about this? If they want in, they will get in. We say that too. We don't even think, I'm not about to tell you that if you put our technology on your device, no one can get in. What we're going to tell you is you'll know and you can defend yourself. And that's what's critical, because right now you don't know, so you cannot defend yourself. So I've been approached, again, this is my therapy session. I appreciate you guys hanging on for 30 minutes. Well, why don't we just educate our users? Why don't we just better educate our users, and then we won't have these problems? And I keep thinking, oh my gosh, as much as I love, and we have to educate users, clearly, right? We have to educate users. But clearly, we're not going to get there if our adversary only has to break through user education. That's not much of a barrier to entry to your mobile device. First, most of the network type threats, the user will never even know they happened. The device does this, the protocol itself is vulnerable. The user doesn't have to click on anything, accept anything, nothing. It just happens to them. But even in places where the user is, we'll say, culpable to some extent, look at this cute little girl here on the left-hand side. Isn't that the most darling little girl you've ever seen in the world? Don't you totally want to download advanced photo editor in order for you to do that with your kids? That's malware. That is malware. Now, somebody tell me that a user can be educated that they need to make sure they do not download and install that app. It's even my process. I'm cheap, just like all of us. When I have a new thing I'm trying to do on my phone, I go to the App Store, I search, I pick the free ones, I try the free ones until they exhaust me and I can't do what I want to do. Then I think about buying something, right? We all do that. How is user education going to fix this? And on the right-hand side, here's a fake BBC News app. You tell me, they're both sitting right there in the bottom of that screenshot. You tell me which is the real one and which is the fake one that actually hacks you. You can't tell. You can't tell. The difference in this case, by the way, is brackets on the letters LLC versus parentheses on the letters LLC. It's sort of silly, isn't it? Fake apps, malicious apps. These are two examples. The other that I already mentioned, network apps, network attacks. The user, you may say, is somewhat culpable, but frankly, in the real world, you can't. And that is not the solution. So what do? We have two pieces of our solution, guys. The first is we got to start with risk. The first thing you want to do is get the visibility to risk posture so that we can say this device, it's irresponsible to entitle with access to email or SharePoint or a VPN connection to us or whatever it is, right? We've got to manage risk. And second, we've got to have technology on device that defends us if we or when we get attacked. So really quickly, because this is not the main purpose of the webinar, but it's certainly worth at least highlighting. We provide you with a capability that gives you a risk posture of every device. And especially if you integrate us with an enterprise mobile management solution or some other type of management solution, we can do this independently of that, but it's even more powerful when we are integrated there. We'll help you basically right-size the entitlement with the risk. A higher risk device doesn't get much entitlement or none. A lower risk device gets more entitlement. A particularly low risk device gets maybe full entitlement. And this is something we can fully automate so that it's not users dealing with your 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever it is devices you're dealing with. It's a fully automated thing. You define the policies, it just works. So managing risk and marrying the level of entitlement with the level of risk is the first of the two main use cases that we can help you with, because that gets your data safer right off the bat. And then second, we've got to have active threat defense. When any of those things show up that I showed you in those early slides, if any of that happens in your organization, you've got to know it because you don't know it right now. And second, you've got to trigger policy to defend yourself. You've got to move data out of harm's way, and you've got to close down access so the hacker can't leap from the mobile into your corporate network. And we do that with an engine we call Z9. Z9 is unique in in the industry. It's an on-device, machine learning-based way to identify attacks in as real-time an approach as possible, whether they're coming directly to the device. Let's say you plug in a USB, and the USB, this is an iOS attack, by the way. You plug in a lightning connection to an iOS device, it can literally hack your device and flash your firmware and persistently sit on your device, and you'd never know it. As an example, we would detect that. In fact, we were at a financial organization where they were doing that, and I saw that. That happens, we'll detect it, you'll know immediately, we'll enterprise wipe the device, and the user will know to bring that to the security team for analysis, right? That's what you need. I won't give you other examples because I think you've already got the idea. So how do we deploy Z9? Z9 is that detection engine that accomplishes those two use cases. How? The first is as an app. You'll push it through your MDM, or you'll tell your users to download it, whatever it is. You'll get an app on your device that covers the entire device. No matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, the app is running. It's going to protect you. It's going to trigger those defense mechanisms when necessary. The second way we deploy Z9 is into your apps themselves. You guys not only need to cover the mobile as an endpoint, like your Windows desktop, you've got to think about the mobile security issues of the apps you produce, especially for your consumers. Those apps expose you to threats in some ways even greater than the mobile devices do. Take the typical mobile banking Trojan, or take some of the hacks that have happened in the healthcare apps recently. That is direct into your enterprise's legacy systems, fetching data right out of the deepest parts of your data center from a mobile app. So if the app gets hacked, you're getting hacked, right? So you've got to have defend yourself capability inside your app. And that's what we do by putting Z9 into our SDK. We call it ZApp, which is in-app protection. So those are the two ways, those are the two use cases, and those are the two ways we solve for those two use cases. So my job was to get free therapy and do it under 30 minutes. I managed to do those things. I feel much better. I really appreciate it, guys. And JT, did we get any questions, or does anybody want to send me a bill?
Yeah, no, we actually did get a lot of questions, and we had actually a couple people volunteer for you to pay them for your therapy session. So
I probably deserve the bill. So feel free, John at Zimperium.com, and maybe we'll work something out.
Exactly. All right. Well, here's a few questions for you. One of them it comes from, let's see, here it is. One person asked for the slides. We will provide the slides to anybody who wants, but they were specifically asking for the breakdown of iOS because a lot of their clients are exclusively on iOS. Now, this was question came in about 10 minutes into the webinar. Mm-hmm. So if the person asking the question still has any questions or doubts about the iOS risk side of things, we can definitely chat about that offline. That same person asked the question, in the last 12 months, the question was how many zero-day vulnerabilities were discovered in iOS. I personally think that part of the way of approaching that is how many CVEs in 2017 for iOS.
Right. Okay. So let me hit both of those just briefly. The first is can we provide an iOS-based breakdown? And of course we can. What you would have seen, by the way, is fewer malicious apps and pretty much equal everything else. So if you and by the way, the malicious app numbers runs around 2.5%. So you would not have noticed the difference. Those graphs would have looked largely the same. The Android world also has a few more older OS versions. iOS has many more than it used to, by the way. iOS used to be about a 90+% running the current version, so there's lower vulnerability there, lower risk there. But now that number is trending toward 80 or high 70s in terms of percentage. So that's not iOS is losing that ground it used to have because they're sending out so many security patches. By the way, that's the reason. How many CVEs, high severity CVEs? Well, I hope you guys are all sitting down. Over the course of 12 months, that number is easily 100. Easily. Go back and look at release notes. We alone have helped Apple patch, it's either 12 or 13 high severity CVEs in the last 12 months. We were responsible, our timing for just proper disclosure caused 11.35 and caused 10.33 just before Black Hat. And of course, we've had CVEs reported over the prior years as well. But I'm guessing, I don't know an exact number, but easily the number is over 100.
Yeah,
and our own system. It is a feature in our system, by the way, to show you the high severity CVEs per platform. Go ahead, JT.
Yeah, no. I was going to say, John, you actually, you're correct. I know that the total number of CVEs, and I think the distinction between high severity and total is an important one. The total was close to 400 for iOS in 2017. To your other point, the last 3 months of 2017 and the beginning parts of 2018, Apple did 11 security patches.
11. So you guys know that's why users are falling off, and they're not doing this because they really love sending out updates. They're doing this because of how many high severity, gotta patch it now, can't have this known in the wild things are going on.
Exactly. So there's another question that was a little bit higher level. We're going to run through a couple of these in the time we've got, and I think it's perfectly fine to go 5 minutes over here. Is there a list of things that users do on mobile to compromise data? What things are difficult to realize? So I think it's a user-based question. I think you've been covering some of it, but as users become admins of these platforms and the security guys have to deal with them, what are some of the ones that these folks do that actually compromise data or set themselves up?
Yeah. I'll give you a couple that are not within our scope of work, and then I'll give you a couple that are within our scope to try to be complete and actually give you a broad enough answer and not try to pigeonhole. There are things that users do either unintentionally or intentionally that usually enterprise mobile management solutions try to protect from. For example, forwarding corporate emails onto your personal email account. That's really bad news because many times those emails contain confidential information and now they're flowing through Gmail to a friend. And that's not good, right? And there are usually corporate governance policies or policies around not letting messages flow like that. That's one simple example. Another one, really simple, is you receive an Excel document, again, in your corporate email, you open it on your iPad, you do a nice big copy and paste into your notepad, and then your notepad is shared with your family. That kind of stuff, it's if that's very sensitive information, that's not allowed. And again, the company makes promises to its suppliers, right? Its customers, its suppliers, and everything that it controls access to the data about its customers and suppliers. So you've got to basically, and you've got to honor those as well. So those are things we do not cover. Those are things our partners cover in the management space, like EMM. Now, what do users do that make security side, right, hackers happy? The biggest one is installing profiles on iOS. The next is installing malicious apps in Android. Those are the things that users tend to do. I gave you 2 examples already. Hey, this is an installer tool for you to get free games. That's actually an iOS profile, and it basically exposes you to a third-party app store where Apple doesn't vet any of the apps, and they very well usually are suspicious or malicious. The other thing that users do in the iOS world and Android is that they give too much permission to apps that are not necessarily good stewards of the data. So here's an app. I have no idea who wrote it. I have no idea where in the world they are. I don't know if they're an adversary to the US or if they're actually, I have no idea. But they ask for my location, my contacts, and my calendar. Sure. Because I want this app to be as easy and fun for me to use as possible. And why does a game need to know my precise location? And why does a game need access to my phone book? Those are things that you start to wonder, right? So here's this many times. Data leaks through apps and, of course, through VPNs and other profiles. And users have done things. Now, again, all of the scenarios I told you in the last minute, those are things we do cover. We vet apps for you, and we tell you this app has the ability to do this and this. and it's developed by some random dude who's written malware and who's, under suspicion. So we actually help you with the whole notion of vetting apps, making sure the profiles aren't malicious or at least not suspicious, and things like that. So we help you on that side.
Perfect. Well, there's one last question, the question is a pretty simple and straightforward. And you were just talking about EMM solutions. The question basically said, we have an EMM and our leaders aren't sure if we should be budgeting for mobile security. How do I respond? I think you've been covering that, but it might be a good wrap-up point.
It's you're going to have to use data, right? Because just like the point of this webinar, the perception is, since I don't see it, it isn't happening. We're going to have to, we'll help you. We'll arm you, you'll have slides here, but we'll arm you with more if you wish. You need to make the case to the manager that, it's an independent decision. Do I need to manage the behavior of my employees? That's an EMM solution or an MDM solution, right? Do I need to make sure that corporate data and access is protected from hacking on mobile devices? That's a separate business case and separate risk posture and separate budgeting even. Many times mobility or IT buys MDM and the security team buys MTD, mobile threat defense, which is the space that we're considered in. So I would help, the best I could do to help is arm you with the data, provide you with one of these kinds of sessions in a one-on-one kind of thing where, your boss gets to stump the chump kind of thing. Well, what about this and how do we do that? And then you'll have a more rational, data-driven discussion, and you'll be able to take them apart. Managing employee behavior versus dealing with data theft through hacking, since they're independent.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you everybody for your time. It's been a great session. Again, the recorded version of this will be made available as well as slides to anybody who is looking for them. But thank you all for the time. And John, thank you very much for letting us sit in on your therapy session, because I know that that's a very sensitive subject for you. So I think we've all been better off for it. So
Thanks
thank
a
you
lot.
all very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.